The first time I noticed something was wrong, it wasn't dramatic. No broken door, no obvious theft, no confrontation waiting in the shadows. It was the smell. I walked into my apartment after work, keys in hand, mind already exhausted, and paused just inside the door. The air felt off. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like a place that had been lived in recently, even though I'd left that morning in a rush. I told myself I was imagining it. I always did. I lived alone in a small apartment I'd worked hard to afford. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, narrow kitchen, creaky floors that complained every time I moved, but it was mine. My first place that wasn't shared, borrowed, or subsidized by family. That mattered, especially because growing up, privacy was more of a concept than a reality. My parents believed family meant access, unlimited, unquestioned access. My sister believed rules were suggestions, especially when they didn't benefit her. And I believed that distance would finally fix everything. I was wrong. The second sign came a week later. I opened my fridge and frowned. A container of leftovers I'd been saving for dinner was gone. Not moved, not pushed back. Gone. I stood there, door open, cold air washing over my legs, trying to logic my way out of the moment. Did I eat it and forget? Did I throw it out? Am I just that tired? I checked the trash. Nothing. That was when the familiar unease crept up my spine. Someone had been here. I didn't call anyone, not my parents, not my sister, because calling them would mean accusing them, and accusing them would mean hearing the same responses I'd heard my entire life. You're being dramatic. We would never. You're imagining things. So instead, I paid closer attention. It started small. My shoes weren't where I'd left them, a chair angled slightly differently, my bathroom light left on when I was sure I'd turned it off. Each thing on its own was easy to dismiss. Together, they told a story. The confirmation came on a Thursday night. I came home earlier than usual, arms full of groceries, already planning dinner in my head. As I unlocked my door, I heard something inside. Movement. Not the building settling, not pipes. Footsteps. I froze. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might drop everything. The footsteps stopped. Then the door opened from the inside. My sister stood there, casual, comfortable, barefoot. "Oh," she said, "you're home early." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked. She blinked. "Relax, Mom needed something from your place." I stared past her. My parents were in my living room, sitting on my couch, like they belonged there. "You used your spare key," I said. My mother looked up, smiling like this was a perfectly normal thing. "Of course," she said. "That's why we have it." My chest tightened. "That key was for emergencies." My father waved a hand. "This is an emergency. Your sister couldn't get into her storage unit." I laughed once, short, disbelieving. "So you came into my apartment?" My sister shrugged. "It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. The phrase that had followed every boundary violation of my life. "You didn't ask," I said. My mother stood up. "We didn't think we needed to. We're family." There it was, the word that erased doors, locks, and consent all in one. "You can't just come in whenever you want," I said, my voice shaking now. My father frowned. "Don't be like this." "Like what?" "Difficult," he replied. I looked at my sister. She was already scrolling on her phone, bored. "You ate my food," I said. She looked up. "You weren't going to eat it." My vision blurred. That night ended the way these things always did, with me apologizing for being upset.
with them acting wounded, with my boundaries labeled as overreactions. As they left, my mother turned back and said, "You should be grateful we check on you." The door closed behind them. I locked it. Then I sat on the floor and cried. I changed the spare key the next day. I didn't tell them.
I told myself that was enough. It wasn't. They didn't stop coming, they just stopped using the key. I'd come home to find my sister's jacket draped over a chair, my mother's perfume lingering in the bathroom, my father's voice echoing in my voicemail. "We stopped by, you weren't there." Stopped by, like I was a cafe. When I confronted them again, my mother sighed dramatically. "Why are you pushing us away?" she asked. "I'm asking for privacy," I replied. She shook her head. "That's not how families work." My sister laughed. "If you didn't want us around, you shouldn't have moved so close." I stared at her. "You're the ones showing up uninvited." She smirked. "We like to keep an eye on you." That sentence sat wrong in my chest, like a threat dressed as affection. The final straw came when I found my bedroom door open, wide open. I never left it open. I walked in slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. My closet had been gone through, drawers opened, clothes shifted. Nothing was missing. That somehow made it worse. I called my parents that night. "I'm serious," I said. "You need to stop coming into my apartment." My mother's voice hardened. "We are not strangers." "You are when you don't ask," I replied. My father spoke then. "If you're going to treat us like intruders, maybe you shouldn't live alone." Silence. That's when I realized something chilling. They didn't see my apartment as my space. They saw it as an extension of themselves, something they still controlled. So I made a decision. Not impulsive, not emotional, calculated. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't threaten. I smiled, and I started packing. I found a new place quietly, signed the lease without telling anyone, moved my valuables first, changed my routines. For the first time, I didn't explain myself. I disappeared. On moving day, I left the apartment exactly as they expected. Furniture still there, lights working, fridge stocked. I handed the keys back to the landlord. Then I walked away. They didn't notice at first. They kept sneaking in, kept stopping by, kept acting like nothing had changed, until one day, they walked into an empty apartment and realized too late they had lost access to me, and they had no idea what I'd put in motion next. They didn't realize I'd moved out for almost 2 weeks. That alone told me everything I needed to know, because if they'd actually been checking on me, not the apartment, not the access, not the sense of control, they would have noticed immediately. But they weren't checking on me. They were checking on ownership. The first sign came in the form of a voicemail. I was at my new place, sitting on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, eating takeout straight from the container. The silence felt different here, cleaner, mine. My phone buzzed. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. "Hey," his voice said, casual as ever. "We stopped by your place again. You must have stepped out. Call us." I stared at the phone. Again, they hadn't even noticed my bed was gone. The second voicemail came the next day. This time, it was my mother. "There was a bit of an issue," she said, her voice tight. "Your landlord said you don't live there anymore. Call me." I smiled for the first time in days, not because I was happy they were confused, but because the illusion had finally cracked. I didn't call back right away. That was intentional. I wanted them to sit with it. The locked door, the empty rooms, the realization that access had an expiration date they hadn't seen coming. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt for years: uncertainty, unease, loss of control. When I finally did call, I waited until I was calm. Not shaking, not angry, centered. My mother answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" she demanded. "I moved," I said simply. "What do you mean you moved?" she snapped. "I mean," I replied, "I don't live there anymore." There was a sharp inhale. "You didn't tell us," she said. "No," I agreed, "I didn't." My father took the phone. "Why would you do something like that without saying anything?" he asked. I leaned back against the wall of my new living room. "Because every time I said something," I replied, "you ignored it." Silence. Then my sister's voice cut in. "Are you seriously pulling this stunt?" she said. "You're overreacting." I smiled. "Am I?" I asked. "Because it feels like follow-through." They came over that night, to my old apartment. Of course they did. They knocked, no answer. They tried the key, didn't work. They knocked harder, still nothing. Eventually, my sister called me. "Where are you?" she demanded. "I told you," I said. "I moved." "You can't just disappear," she snapped. I closed my eyes. "I can," I replied, and I did. That was when the tone changed. The anger gave way to panic. "You're not answering your door," my mother said shakily. "What if something happened to you?" I took a breath. "If you were worried about my safety," I said, "you wouldn't have been breaking into my apartment when I wasn't there." She gasped. "That's not what we were doing." "It is," I replied calmly. "You just didn't like the word." They demanded my new address. I refused. They accused me of being cruel. I stayed quiet. They said I was tearing the family apart. I didn't argue. Because for the first time, I wasn't explaining my boundaries. I was enforcing them. The next few days were a blur of messages. My sister alternated between anger and guilt. "You're embarrassing us. Mom hasn't slept. This is extreme." My parents swung between worry and outrage. "You owe us an explanation. We deserve to know where you are. This isn't how family behaves." I read every message. I responded to none. At my new place, I started noticing things I'd never had before. Peace, control, the quiet thrill of knowing no one could walk in without my consent. I slept better. I cooked without anxiety. I left things where I wanted them and found them exactly the same when I returned. No footsteps, no lingering perfume, no sense of being watched. A week later, my mother showed up at my workplace. That crossed a line. I saw her through the glass doors, standing stiffly at the front desk, purse clutched tightly, eyes scanning. My stomach dropped. I walked out before security had to intervene. "This is not okay," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. "We're worried," she said. "You vanished." "I didn't vanish," I replied. I stepped back. "You're punishing us," she whispered. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself." That was when she said it, the sentence that changed everything. "If you didn't want us involved in your life," she said, "you shouldn't have needed us growing up." I felt something go cold inside me. "That's not true," I said. She shook her head. "We did everything for you," she insisted. "You owe us." There it was. Not concern, not love. Ownership. I took a step back. "You don't own me," I said quietly. Her face hardened. "You're acting like a stranger," she said. I nodded. "You treated me like property." Security approached. I turned and walked back inside. That night, I wrote them a message. Not long, not emotional, clear. "I moved because you violated my privacy repeatedly. I asked you to stop.
You didn't. I will stay in contact on my terms. Do not come to my workplace again. I will not share my address. If you respect these boundaries, we can rebuild trust. If you don't, I will reduce contact further. I sent it. Then I turned my phone off. They didn't respond immediately. For 2 days, there was nothing. Then my sister texted, "You've changed." I smiled sadly. "No," I typed back. I stopped explaining. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that I hadn't just moved. I'd documented everything. Dates, messages, voicemails, photos of them inside my apartment without permission. I hadn't planned revenge. I'd planned safety. Because once people realize they've lost access, they don't always back off. Sometimes they escalate. And my family? They were just starting to realize that sneaking into my apartment had consequences they hadn't prepared for. Because while they thought I was running, I was setting boundaries they couldn't break. And if they tried, I was ready for what came next. The silence that followed my message was louder than any argument we'd ever had. For the first time in my life, my family didn't know what move to make next. They were used to pushing until I folded, used to my discomfort turning into apologies, used to boundaries being temporary suggestions instead of solid lines. This time, the line held. 3 days passed. No calls, no surprise visits, no dramatic voicemails left to guilt me back into compliance. I didn't relax, I observed. Because people who are used to control rarely give up quietly. They pause, they regroup, and I knew my family well enough to recognize a regrouping when I saw one. The first crack came from my sister. She called late at night, when defenses are low and emotions tend to slip.
I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. She exhaled sharply. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I replied. "I moved." "That's not what I mean," she snapped. "You made us look insane." I almost laughed. "By not letting you into my home?" I asked. "No," she said, "by disappearing. People are asking questions." There it was. Not concern. Reputation. "What did you tell them?" I asked. She hesitated. "That you were going through something." I closed my eyes. "Don't do that again," I said. "I'm not unstable. I'm unavailable." She scoffed. "You're really leaning into this victim thing." I felt the familiar tug, the urge to explain, to defend, to soften. I didn't. "This conversation is over," I said. "If you want to talk, talk to me, not about me." I hung up. My hands didn't shake. That was new. The next escalation came a week later. A letter. An actual physical letter slid under my old apartment door, forwarded to me by the landlord with a confused email attached. "Your parents came by again. I told them you'd moved. They insisted on leaving this." I stared at the envelope for a long time. My mother's handwriting. Careful. Familiar. Loaded. I opened it. "We are worried sick. Families don't do this to each other. You are acting out of anger, not reason. We raised you better than this. Call us." No apology. No acknowledgement. No responsibility. Just accusation wrapped in concern. I folded the letter once, then again, then placed it in a folder I'd labeled, quietly and methodically, documentation. That folder became my anchor. Every voicemail,
every text, every attempt to rewrite reality. I didn't collect it to punish them. I collected it so I wouldn't gaslight myself. Because the hardest part of breaking away from people like this isn't the separation.
It's trusting your own memory once they start insisting it didn't happen the way you remember. The third escalation was subtler. Mutual friends started reaching out. Your mom seems really upset. Have you talked to your family lately? They're worried about you. I responded to each message the same way. I'm safe. I'm taking space. Please don't pass messages between us. Some respected that. Others didn't. Those people quietly removed themselves from my life. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. At work, something unexpected happened. I thrived. Without the constant undercurrent of anxiety, I found myself more focused, more confident. I volunteered ideas I'd previously swallowed. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I was avoiding going home to a space that didn't feel like mine. My boss noticed. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon. I smiled. "I feel secure." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what that meant. 2 weeks after the letter, my parents tried a new approach. They apologized. Sort of. My mother left a voicemail. "We're sorry if you felt uncomfortable," she said. "That was never our intention." I listened twice. "If you felt," never our intention. Not an apology, a repositioning. I didn't respond. That's when my father called. Not angry, not emotional. Cold. "This has gone far enough," he said. "You're forcing us into a corner." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "No," I replied. "You're standing in one." "You're isolating yourself," he continued. "That's unhealthy." I laughed softly. What was unhealthy, I said, was living somewhere people broke into whenever they wanted. "We had a key," he snapped. "You abused it," I replied. Silence. "You're overreacting," he said finally. "I reacted appropriately," I replied. "You just didn't expect consequences." He hung up.
That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because something inside me was shifting. Grief. Not for my apartment, for the version of my family I'd hoped they could be, for the fantasy that if I just explained one more time, they'd finally understand. They wouldn't. And accepting that hurt more than any fight. The breaking point came when my sister showed up at my workplace again. This time, she didn't make it past security. She called me from the lobby, furious. "They won't let me in," she hissed. "Good," I replied. "You told them not to?" "Yes." "You're humiliating me." I closed my eyes. "You humiliated yourself by showing up uninvited," I said. She went quiet. "You think you're better than us now," she said. "No," I replied. "I think I deserve peace." She laughed bitterly. "You're really going to throw away your family over an apartment?" I inhaled slowly. "I didn't leave because of an apartment," I said. "I left because you refused to treat me like a person." She didn't respond. I hung up. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had changed. I wasn't waiting for them to understand anymore. I was protecting myself regardless of whether they ever did. A month after I moved, I got an email from my landlord. "Your family attempted to access the unit again. I informed them you no longer reside there and that further attempts would be documented." I forwarded the email to my folder. Then I called the non-emergency line. Not to report them, to ask questions. What constitutes trespassing if someone no longer lives at a property? I asked calmly. The officer answered clearly. I thanked him. I wrote everything down. I didn't want a restraining order. I didn't want escalation.
I wanted safety, but safety requires preparation, not denial. That night, I stood in my new living room and looked around. My space, my rules.
No spare keys, no surprise visits, no guilt disguised as concern. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Ownership, not of a place, but of myself. They thought I'd moved out to punish them. They were wrong. I moved out to survive. And the moment they realized they couldn't bully, guilt, or corner their way back into my life, they did something I never expected. They panicked, because people who are used to unlimited access don't handle closed doors well. And they were about to learn that what came next wasn't chaos, it was consequences. The panic didn't explode all at once. It leaked. Through cracks they didn't realize were showing, through rushed decisions, emotional missteps, and a sudden loss of the careful confidence they'd always worn when dealing with me. People who are used to control don't react well when they lose it. They unravel quietly at first, then publicly. The first sign was my mother showing up at church, not to pray, to talk. I found out through a mutual acquaintance who messaged me late one evening. "Hey, your mom asked me if I knew where you were living now. She seemed really upset." I stared at the screen, jaw tightening. This wasn't concern. This was fishing. I replied simply, "I'm safe. Please don't share information about me." The acquaintance apologized immediately. That told me something important. My parents weren't just crossing my boundaries anymore, they were starting to cross others. A few days later, my aunt called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "I just wanted to check in on you," she said carefully. "Your parents are struggling." I leaned back against my kitchen counter. "Are they?" I asked. She sighed. "They don't understand why you'd shut them out like this." I didn't shut them out, I shut the door. There was a pause. "That sounds harsh," she said. "No," I said calmly. "Harsh was sneaking into my home." Another pause. Longer. "I didn't realize they were doing that," she admitted. "They were. Repeatedly." She inhaled sharply. "Well, that's not okay," she said. I closed my eyes. Validation, unexpected, quiet, settled in my chest. "Thank you," I said. The next escalation came in the form of a family meeting, or rather, an attempt at one. My sister texted me a group message I wasn't included in. "We need to sit down and talk. This has gone too far." I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a private message to her. "I'm open to conversation, not ambushes." Her response came instantly. "You're being dramatic." I smiled without humor. "No," I typed, "I'm being clear." They tried another tactic after that. Guilt. My mother sent a photo, an old one. Me as a child, standing between her and my father, smiling awkwardly. Caption, "Remember when we were happy?" My chest tightened. That one hurt, because it wasn't manipulation born of anger. It was manipulation born of fear. But fear doesn't excuse control. I didn't respond. Instead, I added the photo to my documentation folder with the date and context, because even love can be weaponized. The real turning point came when my parents contacted my landlord again, this time demanding to know where I'd moved. The landlord emailed me directly, apologetic but firm. "I've told them multiple times I can't share that information. They're becoming persistent." Persistent. That was a polite word for refusal to accept reality. I thanked him and asked him to keep documenting. Then I took a step I'd been avoiding. I spoke to a lawyer. Just a consultation, just information. No threats, no filings. Knowledge. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained everything. The spare key, the uninvited visits, the workplace appearances, the attempts to locate me through others. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "You're not overreacting," she said. That sentence nearly broke me. People like this, she continued, often escalate when they lose access, not always violently, but persistently. You're doing the right thing by documenting. I exhaled shakily. What should I do next? I asked. She gave me options, clear ones, and for the first time I realized something profound. I wasn't powerless. I'd just been conditioned to believe I was. When my parents found out I'd spoken to a lawyer, everything changed. Not because I told them, because someone else did. A family friend, well-meaning, misguided, mentioned it in passing. My phone exploded that night. Calls, texts, voicemails, anger had replaced panic. How dare you? This is an attack. You're threatening us now? I listened to one voicemail, then stopped. I didn't need to hear the rest. I sent one final message. I am not threatening you. I am protecting myself. Do not contact me again unless it is to respect my boundaries. Then I blocked them, all of them. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. Grief rushed in where chaos had been. I cried that night, not because I regretted my decision, but because I finally understood what I was losing. Not my family, the idea of them, the hope that they'd change if I just tried harder. That illusion was gone, and illusions, when they shatter, leave sharp edges behind. Days passed, then weeks. No contact, no surprise visits, no messages filtering through mutuals. It was like the storm had exhausted itself, and in the quiet aftermath, I found myself doing things I'd never done before. Sitting in my living room without fear, leaving for work without scanning the sidewalk, answering my phone without bracing. I slept. Deeply. One evening, I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about them all day. Not once. No anger, no vigilance, just absence. And in that absence, something new had room to grow. My sister tried one last time. She emailed me from a new address. Short, defensive, tired. I don't recognize you anymore. I stared at the words for a long time, then typed back a single sentence. I finally recognize myself. I didn't wait for her reply. I blocked the address. People assume stories like this end with confrontation, with dramatic showdowns and final words shouted across rooms. Mine didn't. It ended with distance, with paperwork, with blocked numbers and changed routines, with safety chosen over sentiment. They thought sneaking into my apartment was harmless. They thought access was automatic. They thought I'd never leave without warning. They were wrong. And the thing they really didn't see coming was that once I left, I didn't come back begging. I didn't negotiate. I didn't explain. I built a life they no longer had keys to. Part 4 wasn't about retaliation. It was about resolve. The moment when fear stopped driving my decisions. The moment when love stopped being confused with obligation. The moment when I realized that peace isn't something you negotiate for, it's something you protect. They kept sneaking into my apartment. I moved out. And when they finally understood what that meant, they discovered the one thing control can't survive without: access. And once access is gone, everything changes. The silence didn't end the way I thought it would. There was no final apology, no sudden realization, no moment where someone showed up at my door, changed, humbled, remorseful. What ended was something else entirely: expectation. At first, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for a call from a blocked number, for someone to follow me home, for a message to slip through a mutual contact. I'd lived so long in a state of anticipation that calm felt suspicious. But the days passed, then weeks, then months, and nothing happened. That was when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. They weren't changing, they were retreating, because once control failed, once guilt stopped working, once access was gone for good, there was nothing left for them to grab onto. And people who mistake control for love don't know how to operate without it.
I started rebuilding my life in ways that felt small but monumental. I bought furniture I actually liked instead of what I thought would be practical or approved. I painted one wall a color my mother used to hate. I rearranged my schedule so my evenings belonged to me. No explanations, no permission, just choice. The strangest part was how my body responded. I stopped flinching when keys rattled outside my door. I stopped double-checking locks every hour. I stopped feeling watched. For the first time, my home felt like a sanctuary instead of a hiding place. That alone was worth everything I'd lost. One evening, while unpacking the last box I'd kept sealed just in case, I found an old photo. Me, my parents, my sister. We were standing in front of a house we no longer lived in, smiling stiffly at the camera. I studied my own face in the picture. I looked small, not physically, emotionally, like I was bracing for something even then. I set the photo down and didn't put it back. Months later, I ran into my sister at a grocery store. Pure coincidence, no warning. She froze when she saw me. I didn't. I felt steady. "You look different," she said finally. "So you," I replied. She hesitated. "Mom still doesn't understand why you did what you did." I nodded. "I know." "She thinks you abandoned us," my sister added.
I met her eyes. "I left a place where I wasn't safe," I said. "That's not abandonment." She swallowed. "You really won't come back, will you?" I thought about it. About the apartment, the keys, the unlocked doors, the entitlement disguised as love. "No," I said gently. "I won't." She nodded once. We stood there awkwardly, surrounded by strangers and fluorescent lights. Then she said, quietly, "I miss you." I believed her. "I miss who I was before I had to protect myself," I replied. That was the truth. She didn't argue. We parted without hugging, without promises, and that was enough. That encounter didn't undo my boundaries. It reinforced them, because love that only exists when you surrender isn't love, it's ownership. I never did file a restraining order. I never needed to. The lawyer's advice, the documentation, the refusal to engage, it all worked together. People who rely on intimidation hate records. People who rely on guilt hate silence. People who rely on access hate locked doors. I had all three. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel the ache. Not for my old apartment, for the family I wished I'd had. For parents who could love without controlling, for a sister who didn't treat boundaries like betrayal. I let myself feel it. I don't push it away. Because grief doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means the choice mattered. The most surprising thing of all, I didn't become lonely. I became selective. I built friendships where my no didn't require justification, where my space was respected without explanation, where care didn't come with strings attached. I learned that peace doesn't have to be loud to be real. 1 year after I moved, I stood in my living room on a quiet Sunday morning. Sunlight poured through the windows. My phone was silent. My door was locked. Not because I was hiding, because I was safe. I realized then that the thing my family never saw coming wasn't revenge. It wasn't escalation. It wasn't punishment. It was permanence. They thought sneaking into my apartment was harmless. They thought I'd always forgive. They thought family meant unlimited access. They thought wrong. I didn't leave to teach them a lesson. I left because I finally understood one. That love without respect isn't love. That privacy is not selfish. That walking away can be an act of self-respect, not cruelty. They kept sneaking into my apartment. I moved out, and what came next wasn't chaos. It was clarity. It was safety.
It was a life where no one held the keys to me anymore. I didn't disappear. I arrived, fully, in my own space on my own terms. And once I did, I never looked back.